Hello, everybody, and welcome wherever you are, whenever you are, to Comic-Con at Home 2021. Doing a panel this afternoon on graphic novels lost and found. The idea here being that in any medium, there's this mystique around the lost work, the lost masterpiece that has been hidden for years or decades that we haven't gotten a chance to see. If you're a film fan, the idea that somebody went and finished an Orson Welles film from Welles's own notes, and that film is being released, or that we found some silent classic in a vault somewhere that hadn't even been rumored to exist. This is the kind of things that gets people excited in the world of music. If we heard that one of the sort of prickly geniuses of music, like Prince or Brian Wilson, had spent the last 40 years distilling everything they know about their craft and all of their worldview into some masterpiece, and now we're finally being allowed to see that, that's another thing that's really going to get people excited. Here for this panel, we're in the medium of comics, and we've got the work of some of the most legendary people that have some of the most important artists of the last 60 or 70 years, and one that we've never heard of. And we're talking about works that have just come to light in the last year or two that have gone through this process of rediscovery and are about to meet the public. Speaking of meeting the public, let me introduce our panel here. So we've got New Yorker cartoonist, graphic novelist, Shannon Wheeler, who is part of the group that rescued Harvey Kurtzman's classic Marley's Ghost and reissued that for the first time a couple of years ago. We've got Fantagraphics publisher Gary Groth, who will be talking about two really exciting projects. One is the long-awaited, much-anticipated Barry Windsor-Smith graphic novel Monsters that was just released earlier this year. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, it is a monument of magnificence. It's just unbelievably intricate artwork and equally intricate storytelling. And this thing has been long in the making. Gary is also going to be announcing in this panel for the first time a new project about a work that has come to light that's really, I think, going to change some of the narratives of comics history from a creator that we haven't heard of. And then finally, and you're going to want to stick around for this, one of the sort of great Heart of Darkness stories of a lost graphic novel. So Dave Sim, who is known to many of us as the guy who put out 300 consecutive issues of Cerebus, really made his mark as an artist, entrepreneur, storyteller in the 80s and 90s, took on a new project in the late aughts that he did in the back pages of a self-published book called Glamourpuss, called The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, which began as an investigation into one of the sort of enduring mysteries of comicdom, which is, how the circumstances surrounding the death of cartoonist Alex Raymond. And he used this as a springboard first to talk about a lot of the technical details of art, and then became a platform for his theories of synchronicity and art history and everything. This has had a long and tortured path to market. Sean Michael Robinson of Living the Line is publishing this book for the first time after it had been completed with some painstaking additional work by Carson Grubaugh. So we've got Carson and Sean also here to chat. My name is Rob Salkowitz. I'm a writer and sayer of things about comics. I write for Forbes, ICV2, Publishers Weekly. I teach comics at University of Washington, and I love this stuff. It is a great pleasure to have these guys here to talk about these new and interesting projects. Let me turn it over first to Gary. Yes.
Okay. This is a body of work that was discovered within the last few years. Frank Johnson was, from all accounts, a very ordinary American guy born in 1912. His hobby was collecting 78 RPM blues records. He himself was a harmonica and guitar playing blues musician. he made, I suppose he made a living being an itinerant blues musician for a number of years before he settled down in Chicago in 1940. Let me check my notes here. In the late 1940s, he settled down in Chicago. He married late in life, and he got a job with a, he was a shipping clerk. He got a job as a shipping clerk in Chicago. And it was a job that he got in his 40s and that he worked at for the rest of his life. He died in 1978. Unbeknownst to everybody, including his wife, he was secretly drawing comics. And he started drawing these comics for himself in 1928. And these he drew these comics in a series of notebooks, approximately 35 different notebooks. And he apparently drew them only for himself. We found no one else who actually saw these. When his wife was cleaning out his possessions when he died in 1978, she discovered these notebooks in a trunk. And she had no idea they existed. You know, he did these before he married her and during their marriage. And there are 35 notebooks with about 1,800 pages of comics and a number of just drawings of cartoons. You know, what's, absolutely amazing about this, of course, is that he did this privately without apparently any intention of showing it to anybody, much less being published. He started it in 1920, what did I say, 28. You know, at the very beginning of narrative strips in the newspaper, there were narrative strips in the 19th century, but, you know, narrative strips were really just beginning to be published in newspapers. Little Annie Fanny, I think, started in 31, and Dick Tracy started in 32 or 33. And all of these are either narrative strips or they have a kind of gag element to them. There are 3 different strips he did. One is called The Bowser Boys. And this is about a handful of serious alcoholics, and it just recounts their kind of depraved and degenerate exploits as drunks. And that's all it does. His longest running strip was something called Wally's Gang, which does not appear to be autobiographical, but it's a group of men that hang out together. They have a clubhouse, and they just engage in kind of preposterous hijinks, kind of sitcom-oriented stories, romances, and things like that. He started with Wally's Gang, and he actually ended with Wally's Gang in 1970. I think his last strip was 1976. So, you know, he did all, and now he is, I mean, you can see by the work itself, which is no longer on the screen, that his work was amateurish. It was not, you know, it was not a professional quality. It would not have appeared in newspapers. He probably couldn't have sold anything to a newspaper syndicate. It's got a kind of, you know, Smokey Stover, Basil Wolverton quality to it. So, you know, some of the stories are actually crime stories. He ranged around. This is part of Wally's gang. There would be crime stories. You can see from this one that it can be talky. I mean, it's and he did all of this work again without anybody knowing about it. He just did it privately.
So how on earth did you get a hold of this stuff?
Well, there are two, I want to mention two people who are editing this book for us. This book is going to appear in, I think, probably the end of 2022. Keith Meyerson and Chris Byrne are editing this book for us. Keith is an incredibly proficient and highly skilled painter. He started or co-started the visual narrative program at Roski School of Art Design in Los Angeles. He taught at the School of Visual Arts, and his work is in the permanent collection of about a dozen museums, including the Whitney, MoMA, and others. It's being co-edited by a fellow named Chris Byrne, who is the owner of the Elaine de Kooning House in East Hampton, which has events with a lot of different artists in it, conversations and colloquies between artists. He was the co-creator with Gary Panter of an exhibition called ZAP, Masters of Psychedelic Art. And he was the former chairman of the board of American Visionary Art Museum. So Chris travels in the fine art world. Keith travels with one foot in the fine art world with his own paintings, and also he's a cartoonist. He's currently working on a graphic novel biography of James Dean. So they brought this to me, and they wanted to know if we were interested in publishing it. And of course, it was just such an astonishing body of work and such an astonishing story that we had to wrap our heads around this and try to figure out how to publish it. So what we're doing is we're distilling it down to approximately between 800 and 900 pages of what we consider to be the most interesting or the best work out of the 1,800 or so pages, and publishing it in 2 volumes, probably beginning late next year.
So this is truly a lost work. I mean, it's something that nobody had ever heard of. Nobody knew who this guy was. He didn't work in any related field to the arts industry. I mean, it's just completely out of left field. And here's something that extends from like the one that you didn't mention, but that I got a little bit of maybe here is Gasoline Alley, especially when you're talking about how the characters mature over the life of the strip and everything. That was kind of an innovation that they'd introduced. And here we have an opportunity to see this. Are you just going to reproduce it right from the pencils like that? Yeah,
it's going to be reproduced in a kind of facsimile form. So we are going to reproduce it as you did on the screen here, exactly as it appeared in these notebooks. So it'll show, the pencil marks, and it'll show the aging notebooks. It'll be very much like what you would see if you actually picked up one of the notebooks and opened it up. Yeah.
Does he have living descendants? I mean, he died almost 45 years ago, I guess.
Not that we know of. No, his wife also died since. So he, as far as I know, he doesn't.
So nobody's going to come forward and say, "Wow, I never knew that Grandpa had this like very rich in her life." I
don't think so. I don't think that he has any, any heirs. Yeah. The work. I should say the work is funny. He obviously did it for himself. It is not literary work. It's there's something, and I've only read like 300 pages out of the 1,800 pages, but there's something a little weirdly childish about it. It is about grown-ups. Wally's gang is about grown-ups with a clubhouse, and maybe it's reminiscent of sitcoms in the 50s and 60s. I mean, it has that kind of quality where the grown-ups behave like children. But they are sustained narratives.
Yeah.
They do involve multiple genres. There's weird. There's almost kind of a screwball element to them.
When you came to this, when you came to the panel with this, I thought we're doing a thing on lost graphic novels, which I thought was kind of a metaphor. This one is actually literally real. Like this is
qualified the most as a lost graphic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought we should lead off with that, because it just goes to show there is a body of work out there by somebody, by a cartoonist that we have never heard of, that is going to appear as this. Looks like it's fairly, like, if you're interested in this stuff, worthwhile to check it out, and just kind of interesting. Moving on from that to a cartoonist that everybody has heard of, to somebody that has like defined the visual language of cartooning, and just one of the probably top 5 most consequential people in the business. I'm speaking of Harvey Kurtzman. He had an unknown, unpublished, hidden graphic novel that nobody had seen for 60 some years. Shannon, why don't you tell us a little bit about Marley's Ghost, and how that came about, and the team that helped bring that to life a couple of years ago.
I mean, yeah, what my understanding is that it was potentially the first graphic novel, and he brought it around to various publishers and was rejected just out of hand. But had he turned it into a book, it would have preceded everything. But I think publishers at that time looked at comics as being, unartistic, not worthy of a book. They're cartoons, they're for children. But obviously this was a project of love for Kurtzman, and he really threw himself into it. And you can see all the visual storytelling that's just his stock and trade. And it's a sort of work that has influenced everybody since. It's all the cartoonists that I know have drawn something, whether intentional or not, from Kurtzman. And so it's neat to see all that ability being put into a classic story like this.
So this was like 1952 or something like that. How much of this did he? Because he was still with Matt at that time, I guess. And how much of this did he manage to get done on his own?
Not a whole lot. He did breakdowns for a good bit, and then did a chapter that was fairly finished, and then had rougher and rougher breakdowns as you went. And so, you can kind of parse it however you want in terms of how much is done. And then Gideon, the artist on the Marley's Ghost book, just seems to be like a reincarnate of Kurtzman. I mean, how presumptuous is it to pick up a half-finished book and then continue on in the style and say, yeah, we'll take one of the best cartoonists in the world and then just finish his work. But Gideon was up to the task. And I mean, he's just a talent. I mean, like that, it's just kind of a remarkable that he was able to do that and get the same vibe and get the same chops that Kurtzman has.
He really does have that loose, but tight storytelling. Like he gets the essence of it. So describe the process, I guess. Like, how did this come to light? Was it Dennis or somebody involved in the estate that found it and decided to move forward with it?
How did that
end?
And then Chip Mosier at Comixology thought that it was a worthwhile project. And and then Josh stepped in as well. Josh
O'Neill of Beehive Books.
So it was, and then I got pulled in towards the end, and so a little bit representing the book. I'm kind of the worst one to represent it, because in a way, I did the least to it, except to cut down the Dickens's language, because I thought it was too flowery. And so I was kind of the hatchet man to come in and cut and dice and splice and say, make it more readable. And in part, one of the reasons I did is Josh is very reverential to Dickens, and he had a real love of Dickens. And I like Dickens okay, but I'm more of a Hemingway, Eileen Hemingway. And I feel like the text is there, and it should be there, and the comics are really a different language. And I felt like Gideon's comic language was so strong that the tale itself of being a morality tale is one that's what was being represented. And I wanted kind of Kurtzman's spirit to be, through Gideon to step forward. So
Now, when there were layouts, did you follow the layouts? I mean, did you break the story down the way that Kurtzman intended up until where it left off, or?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, to a T. I mean, Kurtzman's stuff is the guy just is a major talent, and there was absolutely no reason to stray from his work. It was just then picking up after that to say, you know, is this a Kurtzman? You know, the way that he's able to abbreviate physical language or exaggerate certain physical language, so it's real vaudevillian, but then abbreviate the storytelling to really allow for a lot of cartoonists these days it just feels so much like a storyboard for television or something, and Kurtzman is a genuine comic book storyteller where what he did feels and works in a comic book medium, and Gideon really just grabbed the torch and ran with it. I don't know if just Gideon was raised on Kurtzman, or if he just comes to it naturally, but it was, yeah, it was as faithful as absolutely possible as we went forward. And that was a lot of the work, was keeping it to a Kurtzman feel.
Yeah, I mean, the ironic thing is that, you know, I mean, Kurtzman in his lifetime always launched these projects that look really interesting and important in hindsight, and they were never successful in the moment, you know, other than Mad, which he didn't get the fruits of. You know, and here we have something that, like, you know, many decades after the fact, does lay a credible claim to being, you know, certainly among the very first graphic novels that's done in the language of comics. It's not like some woodcut book or some like book of gag strips or something like that. It really is a graphic novel in that sense. Was it Kurtzman's intention to adapt the thing faithfully? Like, I want to do it like Dickens did it?
Yes. He really, Kurtzman, it was, like I said, a project of love, and he was really trying to represent Dickens. And it's interesting because Kurtzman to me is so much about brevity and this efficient storytelling, and Dickens just, you know, a nickel a word, or I can't remember how much he was paid, but he just, you know, like, well, I got to finish this week, and he just sprawls and meanders. And so the marriage of those two, it's a little bit, it's like the Beatles, where you've got Lennon and McCartney or something, where they, you know, they're diametrically opposed, but then together it does oddly seems to work together in a way that you don't expect. Yeah, and a lot of it, our job was just taking the momentum that was started in the first little piece and then just saying, okay, let's finish out in the language that Kurtzman defined for interpreting Dickens. And it was interesting. I mean, it was neat because for me, it was not so much creation as just solving a puzzle and keeping things on track. And really, Gideon and Josh, they deserve the bulk of the credit. More than the bulk. I mean, they really did all the work. I was just keeping it on track and Hatchet Man. And then Dennis Kitchen, holy cow, like you know, he steps in as an editor, and I was just astounded at his observation. It's a testament to having done something for a lifetime, and then all of a sudden you see, you know, the benefits of it.
Speaking of having the presumption of finishing the work of a creator that's left undone, I want to move now to one of the great kind of interesting stories about how a comics project came to life, with Sean and Carson talking about Dave Sims' strange death of Alex Raymond. Sean, why don't you tee it up and just introduce, like, what is it? Where did it come from? How did it almost get lost?
Well, as you mentioned in the intro, Dave had started this as part of a Glamour Puss, which is, you know, how do you follow up 6,000 pages of a single story? Well, you draw pretty girls and you copy comics panels of people who have chops that you don't have. And Dave drew Glamour Puss for a couple years, and I believe that Carson and I both first were exposed to both the Strange Death of Alex Raymond, but also Alex Raymond's work, reading it in Glamour Puss. And I used to pick up my copy of Glamour Puss every other month down the street from where you guys are now, near the college, and I thought it was a fascinating book, and I was really interested in especially his observations about the technical side of reproducing comics at the time, which I thought were very interesting. And years and years later, I had kept in touch with Dave. I had interviewed his collaborator, Gerhard, for the Comics Journal, and had kept in touch with Dave, corresponding briefly a couple times. And the blog, he had a problem with an edition of one of the Cerebus books that was being put out digitally. And I stepped in to help. What I helped was giving him a little bit of advice of a technical nature. Here are some of the things that I've learned from my process going through this book that I had illustrated, and the pre-press I did. And here's the things that seems to me that are the problems with this print problem. And the next thing I know, I am heading up a project for him, and that was to restore the entire 6,000 page Cerebus in the most complicated way possible, meaning original art, production negatives, print file or print scans of print copies, and basically using whatever is best per page to do it. So having done that for a while, Dave mentions, oh, hey, I'm actually working on this Strange Death of Alex Raymond, and it's going to come out from IDW, and I've drawn 180 pages of it, which was a shock to me. It was fascinating. He would occasionally fax me pages like at size, fax machine reproductions of a few pages that he was working on. And it's this technically sophisticated, incredibly complex layouts, just incredibly tangled visuals. And he's producing all this at his studio by himself with some ink and some tracing paper and a prosumer fax machine that has a photocopy function. But at a certain point, he had faxed me that he was having problems with his hand. He wasn't going to open a certain package because if he did, he wouldn't be able to draw for a couple weeks. And I thought that was a very strange detail. And it turns out that this, whatever it is that he has, had progressed to the point where his right wrist wouldn't function properly anymore. And so basically, when he is making a very nuanced move with his right wrist, there's a sticking point in his wrist, and it'll cause his entire hand to spasm. And if he tries to push past that point, he'll get so much fatigue in the wrist and arm that he's basically unable to use his hand for any purpose whatsoever. And so if he is not drawing at all, he can type. As long as he's wearing a wrist brace, he can do a lot of sort of normal things that use only a little bit of physical, limitation. But otherwise, it's totally can be totally dysfunctional with his right hand completely. So, up
work, you can see how that might be a problem.
Doing artwork that looks like that, yeah. So unbeknownst to me, he was on the hunt for somebody who could continue to work with him on that. And Carson, that very same blog, was commenting and contacted Dave, and maybe Carson could take it from there. But.
Yeah, well, and thanks, Shannon, for the presumptuous comment, because that's like exactly the dilemma I struggle with this book, is how presumptuous it could be. So that's exactly the right way to put it. But anyways, yeah, I same as Sean, I saw it all in Glamourpuss. I've always been interested in that very realistic pen and ink art. I kind of draw that way anyways. I like to mimic styles, but if I'm left to my own devices, that's what I do. And so, yeah, I saw that book was going to be published by IDW, and I was just a fan waiting for it, hoping to have it on my shelf. And then I would check like once a year on the internet, like, hey, what's happening with Strange Death of Alex Raymond? And had seen that Dave's hand had been hurt, and then probably checked in again a year later to see if anything had happened. And yeah, I saw that he was kind of trying some people out, and contacted them through the blog and said, hey, I think given my natural style and my interest in mimicry, I think I can match what you're doing. And he said, okay, kid, let's see what you got. And I sent him some art, and he gave me some trial pages to do. And I wound up taking over the interstitial material when he moved it from a monthly series to a graphic novel series. He had come up with an interstitial sequence. This is one of the pages on screen that I did from the interstitials. I don't know what that black bar is, but that's okay.
What's amazing about this is that you are basically trying to mimic Dave Sim mimicking Alex Raymond. And also picking up all of the, like, Dave visually quotes, you know, several dozen artists in the course of this book. Mm-hmm. His explorations of style, I guess, is actually part of the point here. Mm-hmm. And that seems like it's like hard enough to just do it, you know, and trying to be faithful to one artist's vision of it. But sort of this Hall of Mirrors is very, very interesting.
It became very weird because Dave was actually trying to draw like Al Williamson, who, you know, rather than Alex Raymond, he has Al Williamson at the peak of like what he calls photorealist comic art. So he wants to draw like Al Williamson. So he wanted me to draw like Al Williamson. But when I look at Al Williamson, it's less detailed than what Dave does. And so I know what me as a fan and what the fans must be looking for. So I got put in a weird position where I'm like, Al Williamson is kind of trying to mimic Alex Raymond, and then Dave is trying to mimic Al Williamson, and then I'm trying to mimic what Dave looks like mimicking Al Williamson, but I'm also being influenced by Raymond and Stan Drake and all the other guys we talk about. So it was a really weird thing to nail down.
It's one of the things that's the most remarkable about the book to me, and was most compelling about the early sequences, the portions that Dave was doing by himself, is that the performance aspect. It's every panel is a performance. None of these samples that he's using in the story are reproductions of an original. We didn't go, you know, Dave didn't go down to Heritage and shoot a bunch of Alex Raymond originals and then plop them in the book. He is attempting to recreate these things. And so you have this sort of performative aspect of the book that is someone attempting to faithfully recreate and evoke, a lost original, which, you know, in itself is part of the thematic aspect of it. So when David actually had the injury, I just told him, I think that, you know, because the performance is part of it, you should just, you know, if you have been documenting your ability to draw and increasing your ability to draw and increasing your ability to mimic these other people, you should probably just let the book diminish as your abilities diminish. And, you know, if the performance aspect is important to you, you know, it should just tear down as you're going, you know, do whatever it is that you're capable of doing to the point it is that you're capable of doing and reproduce it that way, you know, have the book end with whatever it is that whatever type of mark making you're capable of doing. But I think that for him, the narrative structure was actually more important than the performance aspect. So this is one of Carson's spreads here. And interestingly enough, this is another page where Dave actually did some drawing for Carson's pages. I remember Dave's preliminary drawing for the figure on the lower left there was quite striking.
Are these pages that you drew, or are these Dave's pages?
This is like all my, you know, that's what the art looks like on my piece of paper that my pen touched, but he would lay them out. So that's like a faxed cut, like paper cutout collage with, his drawing on the woman dancing in the lower left. I think he drew the film projector, but I redrew it. He you know, so he draws some stuff to indicate what he wanted, but then that's my interpretation of his collage layout.
Like getting the rendering, the different types of effects that he was looking for on a particular page. So even if his hand wasn't up to making finished artwork to his standard, he was able to make, you know, some indication of this is a big chunky brush area here. This part should be, you know, pushed back by, you know, cross hatching or whatever it is.
Yeah. So it's like it's half drawing the photos, like the collage that he's made, half kind of like, I guess people would normally call it like laying out and finishing. You know, it's not quite penciling and inking, but laying out and finishing. It's a weird mix. And then later in the book, once he quit, then it was kind of up to me to like write it and lay it out too. to finish up the story. So then it's like all of the weight of like Dave Sims' genius as a formalist in the medium. And now I got to keep up with that to make the reading experience some kind of finished, concluded thing, instead of just, here's the how many pages we did together and there's no readable ending. It's just, you know, put it on the record at least.
Yeah, so
I don't think either of us wanted that.
Dave had completed 180 pages by himself. Carson came in and did a certain number of pages with Dave, both the interstitial material, but also Dave writing new pages specifically for Carson. And when they had gotten to what would have been 2 120-page volumes,
I think we did 252 pages.
Right.
Something like that, yeah.
Dave contacted IDW, and they had several changes over there in the intervening several years. We had all been working on this together, and they were just like, no, not going to happen. We're not going to do it with the plan as you have it right now. You know, and it wasn't like you know, there wasn't like big drama or anything like that. It was just like, it's been a year, it's been 2 years. Where have you been? Kind of thing. And you know, so he and Eddie Kana, who had worked with Dave on researching the book, had decided that they were going to do essentially like a Patreon only release of the first volume, where they were going to sell a certain amount to fund a fairly involved, what would have been a fairly involved tour of every comic shop in California. And it was, I think that they were both underwhelmed by the limited interest that they had in the first volume, offered at a very high rate to a very limited amount of people. And, you know, I think when shocked both me and Carson, and I think Eddie too, when he said he wasn't going to work on it anymore and it's a waste of time, and you know, it's a waste of his time on Earth. And, you know, people have their own, I mean, that is his decision to make, obviously, but that leaves a lot of people in the lurch, including Carson, who had worked, you know, for no fee for, you know, long labor of work. And Carson just said, well, how about I publish it? And he said, be my guest. You know, Dave is a long-standing proponent of people who are collaborators being able to do what they want with their collaborations. And this is a principle that he has been faithful to in every single way. And he just said, you know, you guys take it and do what you want with it. Carson discussed it with me, and we discussed how it would be possible to give some kind of, without telling you know, everybody too much about the entire structure. If you can imagine a mystery book, a mystery novel, you start with a bunch of stuff and you drill down to the answer. Well, this is sort of the opposite structure, where it outward bound. You start with the mystery, and you accumulate more and more as you go. And structurally, there's not really, I mean, all you can really do is sort of let the stuff that happened before sit on its own and separate it enough that somebody can just look at it however they want. And I think Carson's coda, let's say, is remarkable in itself. But to me, anyway, it does the trick, which is looking at what has happened without firmly, you know, smashing it back down or something.
Well, and
it's like if Samuel Beckett had finished Finnegan's Wake for Joyce, we're in that territory. I have to say that this seeing the announcement on this book, because I've been following this project for a while, and I got to say that I think I'm not alone in this, that Dave Sim can be kind of a hard sell. If you look up like doing it the hard way in the, you know, Wikipedia, like there's his picture right there, like in so many ways, you know, including like, you know, keeping his audience on board with stuff. Nevertheless, you know, I found it very compelling, this story that in Glamour Puss, you know, was enough, made me curious enough to like, where is he going with this? I've been following it. And then at one point, Ted Adams handed me this stack of sheets and he says, we're going to publish this. And I was like, I went through it and it was amazing. If you had asked me, like, I would have put more money on seeing the next volume of Big Numbers come out than seeing this thing. Like, And so, you know, the fact that you guys managed to get this over the finishing line, and that it's such an unusual thing, and that no matter what people think about Dave Sim and his public persona and stuff like that, I think this is a work that deserves some attention, because it's really, it's so intense and obsessive, and it's such a, you know, it's looking outward at comics history, but it's looking inward at like what's on Dave's mind and everything. It's quite a thick chunk. Well, I'd like to wrap up with another like intensive labor of artistic achievement, and this is one that, again, it's like I had been informed that this was coming. I didn't know that this was in the works, but apparently it's been going on for, you know, decades. And this is the great Barry Windsor-Smith, who known mostly to the world through Conan and his work in the mainstream industry and things like that. At the end of the 90s, did some really interesting stuff with Fantagraphics on these sort of storyteller editions. If you read Opus, his two art books, you know that there's a guy that has a lot on his mind beyond doing beautiful pictures. I had no idea how much on his mind. Gary, why don't you tell us about Monsters? I'm gonna put up the screen here.
I'm going to skip over Barry's career, although I wouldn't mind talking a little about the broad contours of his career. But Barry, as is well known, started drawing comics in 1969, I believe, at Marvel. He was enamored of Kirby. His original work at Marvel was incredibly influenced by Kirby, and he started drawing mainstay titles like Daredevil and X-Men. And in 1970, he finally sort of started finding his own voice with Conan, drawing Conan. Monsters started in, I think, 1985. It was originally conceived as a Hulk origin story. I believe it was going to be an issue, so maybe a 32-page comic. I believe he had a conflict with Marvel over some of the content of it. So he took it back. He basically said to hell with you, took it back, completely redrew it and reconceived it. And he was continually working on it from 1985 until about a year ago. And of course, he did a lot of work, you know, in between that. He was working on a lot of things, and he finished a lot of things, completed a lot of things while he was working on Monsters. But he was always working on Monsters. This was always the project that that he was pouring himself in while he was doing a lot of other work. So it literally took him 35 years of continual labor to get this book done. Now, you know, I always feel badly when I recount the plot of the work, because I don't think the plot does it justice, because it's such an enormous book. It's 360 pages. It involves, it ranges in, the time span is from 1945 to 1964. So it's approximately 20-year time span. The story moves seamlessly back and forth in different times. And it's about a young man named Bobby Bailey, who walks into a recruitment office in let me see. Well, he walks into a recruitment office, I forget what year it is. And the government takes him in because he basically has no past. His parents are no longer alive. He doesn't have a social security number. And they decide that they want to implement genetic experiments on him that they had discovered in Nazi Germany at the end of the war in order to create a super soldier. That is as comic booky as it gets. What the story is really about is familial trauma. I'd say it's about the more unsavory aspects of what the United States government is willing and capable of doing. Now, I should probably posit one of those Weasley disclaimers you see at the beginning of commentary tracks on streaming movies and DVDs, where what I'm telling you is my interpretation and my understanding, not the author's. So the book travels from 1945 to 1964 and charts Bobby Bailey's home life, his life as this genetic creation of the United States government. But it's primarily about this family trauma that has visited him and his parents. And the book is 360 pages long. It is dense. It is so copious in its range of what it succeeds in doing, that I think it's just one of the most astonishing graphic novels I've ever read. You know, Barry is a master of what I would call mise-en-scene. There are extended scenes of family life between Bobby Bailey's parents. You know, there are various set pieces that go on for many pages, a lot of talking heads that are absolutely mesmerizing. I would probably compare them more to theatrical set pieces than I would to what I perceive as traditional comic storytelling. There is, and I counted the pages, there's a 58-page sequence at the end of the book that involves the US GIs discovering this genetics lab in Nazi Germany. And it goes on for 58 pages. And it has, the intensity is so remarkable and sustained that I'm not sure I've seen anything like it. The only thing I could compare, was thinking about whether I'd ever experienced anything like this in comics. The only thing I could come up with was some of Joe Sacco's work, where he explores war.
The amount of craft, it's like, if you know, for those of us who know Barry Windsor-Smith's best, you know, most beautiful decorative artwork, and he has this lovely style and really light touch on the hatching and all of that. He's taken that to a whole, you know, completely different level. Gary, do you know if he had fully realized the script and then spent 30 years just drawing it, or was he evolving the story and rewriting it and working it?
I don't know that. I think, based upon what Barry's told me, is that no, he was probably writing it as he went along. He did not have he certainly did. I don't think he had a full script. I think he was writing it as he was going along.
As you say, the story evolves from these sort of, you know, you read the first, I don't know, first 70 pages, let's say, and you feel like you're in one kind of a story. You feel like this is going to be sort of a pulp adventure story, thriller with, you know, some kind of a horror payoff or something like that. And then it goes off in a completely different direction. And the way that he paces it out, you know, it's sort of a cliche, and, you know, like that when you do a monster story, it's like, well, the humans are the real monsters, you know, and it's like these sort of facile inversions that you get. And he takes that, he goes like 5 or 6 levels down with how he inverts the storytelling style, your expectations, like who the characters actually turn out to be, like all of this stuff. It's very, very sophisticated, multi-layered approach here. And again, it's like, you know, you think of Barry Windsor-Smith as a great artist, but man, this is some ambitious.
No, I mean, I tend to think he put everything he had into this story. Everything he learned drawing comics over the last 50 years. I mean, the craft is astonishing. I think somebody could do a PhD thesis on just balloon placement, because if you read multiple pages, you'll see where the balloon moves your eye perfectly. I mean, and there are multiple balloons. in the pages, multiple balloons and panels, and it moves your eye from one panel to the next panel to the next panel in such a way that I've rarely seen done in comics. In fact, I mean, I can't recall anything off the top of my head. And the transitions from past to present, from one setting to another setting are so seamlessly and beautifully done. I mean, for a work that's been done over 35 years, it's remarkably seamless.
Well, he has been seldom seen in the comics and art world, even for the last 15 years, I think. And now you take the curtain off of this thing, and you can see why, because
I think in the last 15 years, every time he really bore down on it. He wanted to finish it. I didn't even know. I mean, I had visited him at his home maybe 15 years ago, something like that, and he showed me a lot of pages from it. But he had a lot of pages to go, and he wasn't sure when he was going to finish it. And I'd been in touch with him intermittently between then and now, and he just popped up one day and surprised me. He said, "I just finished it," which indicates to me that he'd been working on it as hard as he could between then and now.
Yeah.
There's another element of commonality to me about several of these projects, and that's if you think about the when the sort of rock and roll paradigm shifted from the single to the album, you left behind some of the artists that were really big single artists and never made that one killer album, and now the currency is the album. And in a similar sense, the currency is now the graphic novel. That's the thing you stick on your shelf and the thing that you keep around. And the comic is the sort of the single, the thing for the obsessive, the thing for the other. And in the case of somebody like Kurtzman and definitely Barry Windsor-Smith, like their best stuff is sort of stranded in a sense that they weren't making, at the height of their powers, they weren't making work that fit within the new paradigm. And you see like things like the Kurtzman collections that Fantagraphics put out as I see that as an attempt to rectify that, and that you put all of Kurtzman's war comics together and it looks more like a graphic novel, it gives that accessibility to it. And the same thing with the Marley's Ghost project. I mean, you're giving him that album currency. And I thought that was a pretty, interesting way. I got my copy of Monsters this week, and I've been slowly reading it and blown away by it. But that's been my experience with it, is like, oh, he got to do something in this other medium that's obviously related, but
I like the metaphor. I think it's really interesting, the single and the album. And then, I mean, the thing that I notice is that another commonality is just how influential, like Dave Sim, regardless of, all the caveats, like every comic artist I know has used his language. I mean, that guy just developed panel breakdown and storytelling device, and that he's able to take the Marx Brothers and translate that physical humor into comics just shows it. We've all learned from that. And the thing
I was shocked to see it in Monsters. I mean, I said there were some pages out of Monsters just on my flip through that looked like they could be straight out of the Church and State, the early ones, specifically the text use on the top as a means of condensing the narrative, and the particular visual way it was done, which is an interesting circle given how much of an influence, obviously, Barry was on Dave's early work.
So Sean, when is the book going to be available, and how do people get a hold of it?
That depends on our print run, but it's either going to come out in mid-July or it'll come out in mid-August. We've booked a printer that a certain guaranteed amount of basically press time, and if our print run is wildly higher than what I'm expecting, then we will be coming out in mid-August. Otherwise, sometime in July. So,
Carson, Sean, I think it's funny.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think it's funny you bring that up, because The Strange Death of Alex Raymond's actually like Dave's single, as dense as it is compared to Cerebus. He's going the opposite way.
Well, he got an opportunity to do something at the pace that he actually wanted to do, as opposed to being chained to the treadmill, which I think is a lot of how he regards the monthly book at this point. Is that's what we had to do in order to get out 20 pages in a cover a month.
So Carson, are you doing any other comics projects, or where can people find your work? And
No, I'm just focusing on teaching now. I mean, me and Sean are doing a thing on YouTube where we're looking at comics and looking at production quality and kind of formalism in comics. So that's well, I have something I want to do, but it's going to be a while. You know, I teach at 3 different places. I work like 14-hour days some days, so that's my focus for now. I do have a project, but it will be years before I even started, I'm sure. Another lost one.
Gotcha. So we'll be talking about you on version 2 of this panel, I guess.
Yeah, like 20 years from now, when my wrist doesn't work.
Shannon, what are you up to these days, and can people still find Marley's Ghost out there?
Yeah, Marley's Ghost is still on Comixology, and we're looking at print options and actually thinking about going to print with it. I don't have a schedule though on it. On a personal level, I just finished a second comic book, education comic for a Down syndrome group in the Northwest. And so it's all about, the first one was all about COVID, second one about vaccines. And that one, I've links to it online. And then as I just finished taking the Mueller report and turning it into a graphic novel. And so now I'm just cleansing my palette with taking my Too Much Coffee Man opera, and the opera was based on the comics. So now I'm taking the opera and I'm doing a comic based on the opera, based on the comics. But it's
the transmedia treadmill.
Yeah, it's so nice though, because the script is written and I'm just letting loose with visuals and just leaning into my Wolverton, channeling Wolverton with all the cross hatching and yeah, just so, I don't know, like, yeah, that's what I was working on here, is just like working on little pages and taking the libretto. And we got a grant to do a 3rd act to the opera. So I'm thinking of going back, revisiting that this summer, having Too Much Coffee Man in Hell, which would basically be 2020.
I can't think of very many other comics that have been adapted into operas. So congratulations on that one. So Gary, to wind up, I know Monsters is out now. What else? What other items of note do you want to leave with our viewers here?
Well, we have so many great books coming up. I should mention Monsters got a New York Times book review 2 days ago in the Sunday Book Review, and it is getting, tremendous, and I think well-deserved press coverage. Boy, we have a lot of. We could do another hour on the books coming up from us. I think some of the highlights would be a book called Stone Fruit by Lee Lai, which is a familial drama. A book called Red Rock Baby Candy by Shira Spector. Both of these are debut graphic novels. Red Rock Baby Candy is an autobiographical book about her attempt to become pregnant and to cope with her father dying of cancer. And it's done in a shockingly unique way, where every page is essentially a montage that is easily followable as comics, I would say. And then the last thing I would mention is a book we're publishing under the Fantagraphics Underground imprint called From Granada to Cordova, which is a dementedly satirical work by a Polish cartoonist by the name of Pierre Dola, who has never been published before. He's 52 years old. He's a dishwasher, lives in Poland, and he's been working on comics for years, not unlike Frank Johnson, and has never been published, submitted a 300-page graphic novel, which we're publishing, and then has subsequently submitted a 450-page graphic novel called The Corona Bible, which we'll be publishing early next year.
Very, very exciting stuff. Well, Carson, Sean, Shannon, Gary, thank you so much for sharing some time. I'm Rob Salkowitz. You can follow me at Rob Salk on Twitter for stuff that I'm writing about, including all of these things. Read good comics, everybody. May all of your graphic novels eventually be found. Thank you.